for our Day in the Life of a UX Designer by Alicia Moore. We're so excited you're here, and we're so excited for Alicia to be presenting to us today and telling us a little bit about what her work entails and how she got there. So if I could get you guys to please sign in if you haven't already. It's the same as the registration form that was sent out. So I'll just keep the QR code on the screen for another minute and a half, and then we'll get going. All right, anyone else need it on the screen for longer?
There's still people joining.
Oh, okay, I'll wait then.
Yeah, we can give people a few minutes.
Yeah. All right. Welcome everyone. If you just joined, please fill out the sign-in form if you haven't already, because with the email that you sign up here will be where we'll share the meeting recording with you afterwards. So, am I still audible? Okay. Yeah, so I said, please sign in with a good email address because we'll share the meeting recording there. So if you want to go back to this event and go over anything that you might have missed, just make sure to sign in so we can get that shared with you. All right, I'll just wait a little bit longer, see if other people are joining in still. Are you guys excited for Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can't.
I hate Thanksgiving though. I mean, I don't hate it, but it's just always like on my birthday because like my birthday is like the 29th, and then it's like a weird time because people are always out of town or it's during finals.
Oh man. Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
One day when you graduate, it won't be on during finals. It'll just be during Thanksgiving. If that makes you feel better, you know.
True. True. Can't wait to graduate.
Right? And then you're gonna be like, oh, that's just one less thing.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're good to move on. Are people still joining in? Can't tell. All right. And so some of the upcoming events we have after this one is next Wednesday, we'll have another speaker event where Chinu Chari will be talking a little bit about UX and conversational AI. And then we'll have a Thanksgiving fundraiser following that. So make sure to follow us on social media to stay updated on the fun stuff that we have planned for the rest of the semester. But with that, I want to kind of hand it off to Alicia to introduce herself and get going with this amazing presentation.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. This is great. I've been doing a lot of digital presentations, but I always like to do things like this because this is always more fun than my day-to-day sometimes, which we'll talk about a little bit as we get in here. I'm going to share my screen. So one of the things that I wanted to do for this presentation is to kind of give you guys an idea of like how I got to IBM. And the reason I decided to start this way is like there's a, as you guys all know, there's a process to everything and anything, and my journey was long and not very traditional, but I hope a lot of you guys can at least identify with it. And towards the end or at the end, feel free to ask any questions, whether it's about my career journey or whether it's about IBM. So I'll allow enough time for you guys to do that. So again, I'm Alicia. I'm an advisory UX and visual designer at IBM, which I'll discuss this title a little bit later. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. So some quick facts about me. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I actually grew up in a town just north of Dallas, Plano. Not sure if anyone knows where that is or has been there or lives there, but that is my hometown. I went to Plano Senior High and really had all of my primary and secondary education in Plano. I have a twin sister. In fact, I have an identical twin sister. Her name is Sheena. I always tell people that because sometimes they meet her or they run across her picture somewhere and it's super confusing, but she looks exactly like me. I'm also a snack connoisseur. So before this meeting, I was eating like a bag of potato chips. I love chips. I love all snacks, but chips is probably my guilty pleasure.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing your are the slides changing? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, are they not changing?
It's been lagging a little bit.
Okay, I'll slow down a little bit. What can you see now?
We're seeing quick facts. So my path to design was not typical.
Okay. So my path to design, as I mentioned, was not typical. I took a very interesting kind of path to get to where I am now. And so to begin, I have to start off. It's kind of like how I got here. And I put this quote in here because when I think about careers and paths and lives in general, it's not linear. It's definitely like a roller coaster. There's ups, there's down, there's curves, there's drops for sure. And so this quote I really like, it says, trajectories aren't linear. Life's just a roller coaster. If you're getting a chance to do cool stuff and it's varied stuff, just enjoy it. I guess I'm a believer in the randomness of life rather than it being a linear trajectory or an arc, a consistent, smooth arc towards anything. And this has definitely been my career. And so first, when I graduated from Plano Senior High, I initially went to school for forensic chemistry. I really thought I was going to be like a scientist, some sort of biologist, or work in some sort of lab. And I began to realize after taking a few courses, I was like, I do not want to be stuck in a lab all day. Props to people who do it. I think it's a great job, but it wasn't something that I could really do. And so I did a pivot in the middle of all of that. And I decided to look at mass communications and public relations. At the time, Sam Houston State University, where I went to school, offered this program, and my degree actually has a slash in it. So it's public relations / mass communications. A very interesting kind of degree plan in which I learned writing skills, communication skills, but also graphic design skills, because at that time, a lot of public relations people were being asked to do a lot of in-house design work at their companies or organizations. And so they wanted to make sure that we knew how to do that work. And so once I graduated from school, I quickly moved to Austin. My sister was living here at the time, but I had also got a job being an in-house graphic designer. And so that's one of the main reasons why I moved to Austin, is because for this particular position. And I was actually working at a mortgage company, a very well-known, prominent mortgage company at the time. And I did not like it. I liked graphic design, but I didn't really like the work that I was doing. In the slide, you can see it's kind of things around like, are you financially fit to buy a house, or mortgage loans and FHA and conventional loans. And you can imagine that although that is interesting to some, for a designer, and especially a graphic designer, it was not very interesting to me. And this was one of the worst times for me as far as career, because I definitely didn't know what to do or where to go, or if this was something that I can maintain long term. So basically I was lost. And this astronaut here in space is pretty much sums it up. It definitely felt very large and very big. And I knew I wanted to do really good design work, but I didn't know what that looked like, or what that meant for me in my career.
I'm so sorry. I think the screen sharing stopped.
Oh, okay.
Teams has been, or here, let me go. Okay, there we are. I think it's back.
It's back?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you
No,
again.
it's totally fine. What is the last thing you guys saw?
I think it might have been just me. Did you guys see everything? The rest of y'all?
Maybe I shouldn't put it in presentation mode. I'll just show it like this. Can you see the little astronaut person?
I wasn't ever seeing it in presentation mode.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Can someone who is on the call tell me what you've seen or not seen?
I see an astronaut that says I was lost.
Okay. So were you guys seeing it in presentation mode or not seeing it in presentation mode?
I wasn't seeing anything at all, actually. I was hearing you speak.
Okay. I'm gonna go back a little bit.
Trajectory.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Can you guys still see it this way?
Yes, that
Okay.
looks good. It's better. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just leave it like this because that might just be a lot better. So I'll just start it. I was lost. So it was one of those situations where I definitely felt lost. I didn't know what direction I wanted to go, but I also knew that I loved design and I loved design work, just not really feeling design work at a mortgage company. So I started applying to other jobs. I started looking at other graphic design positions, and other ways of working, or that people were doing work. And then I realized that I couldn't compete with other designers in the market. A lot of designers had spent their careers and their education specifically in design and graphic design at the time. So I knew I needed extra training for the design career that I wanted, and I needed a more robust portfolio. So I went back to school. I decided while I was working to take classes at night to be a graphic designer, to actually have that piece of paper that said graphic design. But for me personally, it was learning the tools and tips to do my job well and to do my job better. So one of the things that I learned is, like, don't dismiss further education as an option. So when you guys graduate, your education just does not stop. You should constantly be learning something new, taking trainings, listening to courses. YouTube is great. Anything that you can do to kind of like refine your skills or continue to hone in on those skills is really, really important. So then, as a result of going back to school, I was able to get a new job almost immediately. I graduated like in May, and I think by July or August I had already found a new job. And I started working at a small ad agency here in Austin. And it was a great learning experience for me. I got to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, but I also got to not do the kind of work I wanted to do. I got to do a lot of understanding how the business or the agency business works. Like, what makes it run? What do clients look for? How do you communicate with all these different people who have the same goals as you? And so I got to do these are just a few projects that I got to work on. So we had a client that was a liquor store, mostly here in Central Texas. I got to work on like a Christmas bazaar that's really popular here around the holidays. And I got to work on just really fun branding projects, and I enjoyed it. I loved it until I didn't love it. And then I started to realize like, oh, wow, like I really like this job. I like advertising. I like the work that I'm doing, but it wasn't sustainable. The one thing about advertising, if you guys ever have the opportunity or had the opportunity to work in it, it's very, very fast paced. You're working really late nights. You're working really, really hard. And it's challenging work, but it's a mindset and it's a personality that I think does the best in that kind of environment. So after going back to school and then really having the career I wanted in advertising and graphic design, I realized like there are just some things that no matter where you work or no matter where you go, there's always things to take with you to your next job. And the first one was to take risks with your career. I think for me personally, leaving as an in-house designer for a mortgage company, it was all I knew. And although I knew that going to an agency is what I wanted, I was a little scared at first. You don't know what to think, you don't know what to anticipate, but sometimes you just have to take that risk just to see if it's a good fit. You can always go back. It's a little harder to go forward. And one of the things I learned in advertising is to learn from your mistakes and be willing to pivot. In advertising, clients change their minds every second, every day. And so you have to be willing to not be so committed to your designs because it's going to change. Expectations change, the business changes. And so you kind of have to take that with you as well, no matter what career you have going forward. And then thirdly is to be thick-skinned and prepared to deal with all kinds of reactions. I've had the clients who have loved something and started crying. I've had the clients who have been terribly upset. I've had clients that say, I just hate it. So you have to be willing, even in your career, you know, be willing to say, you know, it is not personal. There's not, the work is not necessarily a reflection of who you are as a person. Sometimes design is very subjective, and especially graphic design, and it is definitely very subjective. And so after a while, I've been in advertising for about 4 years, and I was like, okay, what do I want to do next? Who do I want to be? What kind of design do I want to do? And then I said, hello, IBM. At the time that I applied for IBM, I applied online through LinkedIn. So a lot of people ask me like, what's the secret to getting to IBM? And I was like, I don't know. I literally just saw a post on LinkedIn and I applied for it and went through the interview process. And it was pretty simple for me. I know that's not the story for a lot of people and a lot of designers. But there is no real secret sauce, as I would like to say it. It just happened to be that they just liked my portfolio and work, and I got offered a position. So I started in 2016. And what at the time, and this is still true for new hires, is you start with a cohort. You start with people who are typically all new or new designers to IBM. This is me over here, to IBM, and you start together. And basically the process is they teach you the way to design at IBM. It includes a lot of design thinking, which I'll get to in a few minutes. It includes a lot of collaboration. And for me personally, when I started, you go through what they call a boot camp, and it was 3 months long. So for 3 months, you're learning about the IBM business, you're learning about the design thinking framework that they use, you're learning how to collaborate, and you're also working on real IBM problems. So that's what makes it so unique in those 3 months. These are actually problems that the business is trying to solve. And the same is true for their internship program. So if anyone has ever had an internship with IBM Design or would like to have one, the process is the same. You come in with a cohort and you definitely get real world business cases. So at IBM Design, we believe in a few things, and one of them is forming multidisciplinary teams. So you'll work with designers, you'll work with project managers, you'll work with offering managers, which mean people who own certain experiences within the IBM portfolio. You work with architects. You'll work with all sorts of teams. So it's never just design. It's a combination of all different teammates and projects. We take time to form well-researched and well-seasoned user stories. So everything is based deeply in research, and designs are based on that research. And we use user research to inform our design work. So it's very rare, at least from my experience, that you'll work on a team where research is not guiding some of these principles. And that goes back into the principles that guide us. You'll hear a lot about at IBM about this focus on the user. For a long time, IBM was focused on their products, and we forgot about our users, and that created a lot of jarring experiences. So IBM designers are definitely advocates for the user and user-centric outcomes. And then the loop is what drives us. You'll hear a lot of designers talk about this loop. One thing we definitely believe is like design is never really done. You never just say, I'm done. There's definitely iterations of the observe, reflect, and make, and that's also foundationally research as well. You're constantly looking at your designs. You're constantly looking at research and saying, like, how can this be better? How can we improve? What needs to change in order to make sure that our outcomes are focused on the user? And so a little bit of how that works, of course, is the enterprise design thinking, but hills align us. So hills are basically problem statements that the team has written to address the needs and concerns of our users. They align us. Playbacks align us. So I do a lot of presentations to my team and my group about like where we are in the process, any sort of blockers that we're having, any sort of research that we found out that we need to take into consideration on the next iteration. And then I work a lot with sponsor users, and sponsor users can be anybody. They could be anyone who uses the product inside the company, and it could be anyone who uses the product outside of the company. So you can just imagine with the portfolio that IBM has, you could be talking to a lot of people and presenting to a lot of people, depending on the project that you have. So a lot of times it's just a lot of alignment, a lot of communication and collaboration in order to make sure that you're focused on those outcomes. And you guys can kind of see this, how the principles, the loops, and those key parts kind of fit together. So I'm showing you guys this page because I've worked on a few product teams. So the first product team I ever worked on was IBM Cloud, and I had a great experience working on the cloud. And as of right now, I think the cloud is the largest group, and they also have the most designers. So the cloud is definitely huge, and teams are broken off into smaller teams or pods or squads, as we like to call it, and you work on certain aspects of the experience. We also have IBM Design Language. I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to kind of look at this website, but it's just www.ibm.com/design. And you can see like the elements and the grids and the disciplines and the principles that we use in order to design products for IBM clients. And this kind of framework is used for everything, including marketing. So it's kind of, and this is pretty new. When I started at IBM, we had 4 different design systems, and sometimes you didn't know which one to use. And so you would like, I call it piecemealing things together. So now that we have just this solid framework, it's definitely made the day-to-day a lot easier. You can see how IBM Design is being used for all sorts of things. Translation services, colors, looks, feels. So it's pretty great. And most recently, as of like last week, I accepted a position on a new IBM team, which is IBM Red Hat Marketplace, which I'll start December 1st. So that should be kind of interesting for me to be in a different space, but I'm looking forward to it. And thank you guys so much for your time. I'm going to leave it open to questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, so we do have our first question, which is, what's the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part of my job is alignment. I think since IBM is so big, you sometimes, I've been in scenarios most recently where there are teams that are actually working on the same thing and they don't know it. That has been an interesting kind of conversation because sometimes we work in verticals instead of working horizontally, meaning that there are other teams and other projects that intertwine. So sometimes you have to stop and say like, hey, we should be working with this team or we should be working with that team because we both have the same goals. And how can we collaborate to make sure we have good outcomes?
Awesome. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
Samaya is asking, what was the biggest difference for you moving from graphic design to UX?
Yeah, the one thing about UX that I really like is the structure. Like, and I mean that in the sense like there is definitely a wrong way to do UX. Like I don't care what anyone says, there is a wrong way to do it. I think we've all had those experiences, especially on mobile, where you're like, why is this website not accessible, and you're frustrated. So there's definitely a wrong way. In graphic design, I think it's definitely more subjective because art is subjective. You know, we can all go to the same art gallery and I might find a piece to be beautiful and elaborate and great, and someone might say that's ugly and boring, right? And that's kind of the same thing with graphic design. I mean, yes, we can point out like, oh, that's bad graphic design, but to some people, it's just so subjective, and that's the hardest part, I think, for me when it comes to graphic design.
Awesome. Ruchita asks, what would you say are the best tools to have under your tech stack for UX UI?
Ooh, okay. The best tools are pen and paper. I am a believer in pen and paper. I still use pen and paper today. I also highly recommend learning Sketch or Figma or both. It's interesting in this, when I first started at IBM, people were still using Illustrator, y'all. And so we quickly made the transition over to Sketch. Some teams are using Figma. Those are probably the best. And then Abstract is a really neat tool that's becoming really popular in the design world because it's better for collaboration. So those are the tools I would highly recommend it if you want to get those underneath your belt.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Angelica asks, you mentioned about working long nights for certain projects. How would you describe the work-life balance at your work?
Oh, much better. I mean, work-life balance at IBM, they definitely, if you're working late at night, that's not normal. If there's a late night, it's because you have a deadline or some sort of presentation that must be done. When COVID first started, I think people were losing their sense of time. And IBM sent out a message and they were like, no one should be working late. Like, what are you guys doing? Make sure you're taking time for yourself. Make sure you're eating lunch, spending time with your family. So they really, really are fans of work-life balance. I've never worked on a team where the expectation is to, burn the midnight oil.
That's amazing to hear.
Yeah. Don't fear that. That's not an issue. You should. When we were all in the office, it was funny. Like at 5 o'clock, it was like a ghost town. People were gone. So there's definitely this sense of like, when I'm done, I'm done.
That's good. Yeah. Keeping the two lives separate, personal and professional.
Exactly.
That's great. So Sanjana is asking, she's first thanking you for sharing your journey with us, and she's asking, how can she prepare for interviews? Should she start preparing her own designs, or like how can she best prepare for internships with this position?
Yes. Start preparing your portfolio, and I always tell people, like, for me personally, when I look at portfolios, I'm not looking for a finished project or product. I'm looking for, like, how did you get there? Like, I'm a huge fan of, like, the thought process. I like looking at sketches. I like knowing who you worked with, who you talked to, any sort of hurdles that you had to jump over during the process. If there was an argument, I like to read those kind of things too, because it shows and it tells me that you know what it's like to be in a collaborative space. No one does anything alone. We all know that in design. Like to show just this finished project is like, yeah, that's great, but like, how did you get there? So I would say when you're building your portfolio, think about the process of which you work, and how you work and who you worked with, and tell us that. Because I think a lot of people definitely like to see process more than they like to see final pixel perfect wireframes.
That's very true. I agree, because through the process, you can see how the person grew throughout that project instead of just seeing the end product that they were able to establish.
Exactly. And if there was no end product, great. That happens too. I mean, like, you definitely could be working in a platform or in a space where you didn't finish because the business changed, right? And you had to pivot and start working on something else. That's totally fine too. So don't feel like you have to show everything pixel perfect.
Yeah. Going off of that, though, like if you started your own personal project, let's say, would it look bad to have that as incomplete on your portfolio because you're working it on your own?
No, I don't think it's bad to show it as incomplete. I mean, as long as you say, like, you tell me why it's incomplete, or that you're working on it, or that it's taking you time. I think people are really empathetic to that. I know for me personally, I could be working on multiple projects at one time, and sometimes I just don't get a chance to finish it, or at least not finish it in the way that I would want to finish it. And that's okay too, because it shows me that that person has the ability to iterate, like once the time allows, or once resources or time is available, you'll get back to it. So don't feel like you should axe those things because it's just you and you're not finished.
Awesome. Thank you. So Miranda is asking, how do you keep track of all of your research for UX case studies?
Yes, so that has been really difficult for our team. The one thing that we use, that we have to use, is Box. So we have Box, which is kind of like Google Drive or whatever, and we keep track of all sorts of research documentation there. What I like to do is I use GitHub a lot. and it helps me link things to other things, because after a while, there could be a lot of files that you're trying to keep up with. So file management can become very challenging. Each team is different. There was a tool, I'm trying to remember the name, that IBM designers were using. And the reason I can't remember the name is because it wasn't popular and they got rid of it. But it was a tool where it allowed you to kind of keep everything organized. I will say, depending on what organization or business unit that you're working on, you will not have to keep up with everything. For instance, on the cloud, like if you had to keep up with every single thing that was going on in the cloud, your brain would explode. So each team keeps up with their own specific thing that they're working on, and it's typically a combination of Box and GitHub.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So Cameron's asking, is there a market for people more focused on UX research because they like design, but they prefer the research side of it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so on my current team now, we have one researcher and one UX researcher. And I've found that the UX researcher asks more thought-provoking questions than our researcher. And I think it's just a personality thing. I don't think it's because one is better than the other. To answer your question, yes. If you want to do research, make sure that your portfolio indicates that. Like, I don't want to see a whole bunch of like designs when really you should be focused on research and personas. So just make sure that you're tailoring your portfolio and your resume to the type of job that you want. And the reason I say that is because there have been situations where someone has interviewed and their portfolio was good as a UX designer, but they really wanted to do research and they wanted to have a job in research, and we had to deny them that job because their portfolio and their scope of work did not indicate that they wanted to be a researcher. So just make sure that you're tailoring your portfolio to the type of job you want.
Awesome. Yes. So I guess another question that I had throughout this conversation is, as a UX researcher or a UX designer at IBM, do you work closely with like software developers there? If so, like what's the process like with just communication between designers and the developers? Because I know that can also be an essential thing to take into consideration.
Yeah, you definitely want to work with developers. So it's interesting. Most teams have what we call a three-legged stool. So it is designer, developer, and offering manager. That's the three-legged stool. And what happens is you guys are working together to design, develop, and iterate. So I would say your offering manager is the person who basically says this is the business need and the business case. And then designers and developers work together to figure out like, what is that experience like, and can we do it? Is it feasible, right? Because a lot of times what happens is, especially as designers and researchers, you're like, this is the way we should do it. This is the way the research says, the designs have said, this is the way it should be. And your developer is like, well, we can't do that. And the reason they can't do that could be anything from like, the IBM architecture is too old, right? Like we have to update our architecture in order for us to do this thing. Or we don't have enough resources. We can do it if we get more resources. So you never want to be blindsided. So you're in communication a lot. Like they're sitting on design meetings. You're sitting on development meetings. Then all three of you guys or your whole team are sitting together to talk about like the business outcomes, any sort of iterations and changes. So a lot of it is really collaboration and making sure that everyone is aligned on what those expectations are. So it's very, very, very rare that you don't have a three-legged stool. I'm currently in a business unit. I work in support where there's not three. There's not an offering management manager, and there's not development, and it's painful. It's very, very painful. And that's a whole different beast on its own. But typically, you're working with other parts of the business developer on the same project the whole way.
Yeah, kind of like a checks and balance system.
Exactly.
Awesome, that's good to hear. So Samaya is asking another question, and she wants to know, what's your favorite thing about working at IBM?
Oh, I love the people. I mean, it's interesting. So when I accepted the job at IBM, my dad is an engineer at HP, and I remember telling him that I was interviewing. He was like, doing what? Like, because my dad had no idea that design and tech were a thing. And so there is definitely this culture of IBMers love other IBMers. I mean, I'll have my IBM shirt on. I went to Sam's yesterday, and I had my IBM shirt on. This guy was like, "Oh, you're an IBMer? I'm an IBMer too. I retired," and blah 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 blah. And they talk to you as if they know you, and that's definitely something that I've noticed around the world. Just the culture and the people that you work with are so talented, so smart, and just really nice people. People love their jobs, and they love what they do, and they love like educating. Like they want you to know what they do and how they do it. So for me personally, it's all about the people at the end of the day.
That is very true. If you have a good work culture and you enjoy what you're doing, and with the people you're doing it with, it just becomes so much easier.
It does. It becomes, it's hard. Like I said, I'm getting ready to switch teams, and this team that I've been with, we've been together for over 2 years, and I just love them. Like they're your family, and you're like, I don't want to leave them. I'm not leaving him. You know, I'm leaving.
Yeah, just leaving the team.
It hurts. It hurts. It feels like you're losing, you know, your child is going off to college.
Oh, that's so touching.
Yeah, it really, you see that a lot, especially within the design world. You do become really close with the people you're working with.
That's great. So I know you mentioned a couple different projects that you worked on. So like, how long are each of those projects usually? Do they switch around very often?
So when I first started, the first project that I ever worked on took 2 years.
Okay.
And that sounds like a long time, but in enterprise design software, that's pretty fast. I mean, like everything, the bigger the organization is, and that includes your Googles and your Dells and, you know, your IBMs, there's a whole process to things getting approved and released. And so, and there's also iterations, right? Like you might, we call it ship it, means that something is now out public in the world. But that doesn't mean that you stop working on it. You start to refine it. You start to look at data and analytics. You start to introduce new things or new features because either the customer has started to have issues or complaints, or because the business has changed. So from beginning to end, so the project I worked with is called IBM Cloud Lite, which is basically a free tier of IBM Cloud for anyone to go and start using products and services. And it sounds very easy, but we had to start looking at what does the sign-in sheet look like? What does this look like? How do we let people know, like, oh, you like this platform so much? If you upgrade your account, you'll only be paying like $2 a month. And so you start to look at billing, and billing has its own world. And so you can easily get down a wormhole, which we did. We had to surface back up, but most of the time projects are very complex, and there's never like an easy solution or fix. It takes multiple iterations to kind of get there.
Yeah. No, it sounds interesting. So with each of these different projects, like how varied is your role as a UX designer, or is it pretty much the same?
No, I definitely wear many hats. That's a good question. I think so. I always tell people like the more you go in your career, especially at IBM, the more you're asked to do more complex things. That's just the bottom line. And so there are days where I'm a visual designer. There's some days where I'm an advisor. Like I tell people, like, that is not good practice, and here's why. There's some days like today where I'm doing just wireframing. There's days where I'm sitting in with our researcher, listening to feedback from a customer or user. So you definitely wear many hats, which I kind of like because I think that makes me a better designer. Because you have an understanding of like the whole horizon, right? You're not just siloed into what you're doing. You understand like what's going on with the business and what's going on with this particular component of work that you're doing. Since I work in support, I look at everything from technical documentation all the way to someone has issued a support ticket and now they can't get their question answered. So you kind of get a feeling of all different types of things when you decide to look at enterprise design careers.
So would you say you're still learning things at IBM as you go every year?
Oh my gosh, all the time, every day. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that. And I'm even learning about the different organizations. Like like I didn't realize that we had so many different organizations that do different types of design. And that's one thing I always tell people when they come to IBM and they're thinking about switching teams or leaving the company as a whole. It's like, cool, do whatever you feel is right for you. But IBM is so big, you can just say like, you know what, I don't want to be on this product team anymore. Let me go try this one, and you can, and you learn something completely new about the business and what's out there because it's just so big. There's just no way to kind of understand it all.
Yeah, that's good in a way. I feel like it keeps things interesting at work. It's not the same monotonous work every day.
It is. It's very, very interesting. I had a mentor at IBM who's still there. He told me, every 2 years, you should be thinking about the team you're on, the type of work you're doing, and considering moving to a different product team. Because you kind of like learn a different domain, right? Learn a different way of how the business works and the design challenges associated with that particular part of the business. And I always, every 2 years, I think about it when I'm getting ready to say, like, am I going to stay or am I going to look for a different product team?
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I guess, do you have any kind of advice or anything you want to tell to our members who are attending? They're mostly students at UTD who are interested in following UX as a career path. So what advice would you give them to be successful in this field?
Yeah, the first one is like, don't be attached to your designs because everything changes. Like I could go to bed tonight and someone will ping me in the morning and be like, oh, we're gonna pivot. You're like, what? Like you can't get too attached to your design. Be humble. Be willing to change yourself as a designer, right? Like I think when it comes to design, we all feel like we have a unique perspective or a unique aesthetic, I guess is the best word, and we do. But like always be wanting to evolve from that. Always want to learn something new or a different way of doing things and seeing things and really learning. And what I also tell people is like, I think in design we always talk about have empathy. which I totally agree with, but I also think it's important to have compassion, because people, and you'll learn this, people, when they're using your product, they feel really passionate about it. Like they really love it, they hate it, that, you know, we're making their lives miserable or good. And so have compassion for people and the experiences that they are having using your product or your service. And I think that'll help you figure out solutions to some of these problems for sure.
True. Very, very true words. So Arifa has another question for us,
Sure.
and she's asking, have you ever like failed a project? If yes, how did the company or team react to it?
Yeah, I just recently failed a project like 2 months ago. I mean, I failed a lot of projects, so it's not like the first project I've ever failed. Okay, so like the interesting part of being kind of an advisory designer is that sometimes you work with other designers and you have to advise them on what they're doing, whether it's good UX practice or not. And this particular designer, I kept telling her, you know, like, this is, you need to iterate on this. Like you're trying to figure out ways to basically say you got to start all over. And she didn't want to start all over, and so they pushed it out to the public, and it got really bad, a really bad score. Like users were complaining, support tickets were up, and so the business came back to me, and they were like, you know, you were the advisor on this, what happened? And you know, you have to say, like, I'm just an advisor here. You know, I can only do so much without pushing the pixels myself, right? And so you have to have really hard conversations sometimes with other designers, but also in my position, I had to have a really hard conversation with management and executives about why the work was subpar. What things could we have done better, and what things are we going to do now to fix it? And that was a really hard conversation for me, because to some degree, as an advisor, like I'm a manager, I can't slap someone's hand for not doing the right thing. But I also have to be willing to stand up for what I believe in and let people do what they believe is true. And at the end of the day, it just so happens that the score that we got back and the reviews from the public weren't good. So now we have an opportunity to fix it. Failure is just part of the job. Like, you're not going to do everything perfectly. You're definitely going to have people who will not listen to a word you say. And you have to be like, well, ship it. And we'll let the you know, analytics come back, and then we'll determine. So a little bit of that is, you know, be willing to fail and not take it personal, right? Like, because at the end of the day, it's going to be fixed. And it was a mistake on this particular designer, and it was a mistake on the business, and everyone learns from it, and we all kind of just move on. But failure is inevitable. There's going to be plenty of projects that are just they're not going to hit the mark. And that's okay.
Yeah. As long as, I guess, you're learning something out of that and applying that moving forward,
Right.
I think it's totally okay.
Exactly. And no one's going to get mad. I just wanted you guys, no one's going to be screaming at you like, oh my God, like none of that ever happens. Everyone always says, you know, wow, this was a miss on our part. What can we do? What processes can we put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again? That's all the conversation is. It's not like you get a slap on the wrist. It's just like, okay, how can we be better people at the end of the day?
Very true. I see that we're almost at 7 p.m., so I'm going to pull up my slides. So please go ahead and tell us how we did by filling out the feedback form. And thank you so much, Alicia, for holding this session and event and telling us a little bit about what it's like to work as a UX designer, and just giving a little bit of an insight into your work life. So we really
This is fun, you guys. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and thank you for all the advice you gave to our members as well. It's very appreciated. So please tell us how we did. If you liked our event, just fill out that feedback form and tell us how we can improve moving forward, what you want to see. You can also put in suggestions of what you want to see moving forward from the UX Club, and we'll make sure to get those addressed as well. And also follow us on our social media to stay updated on what amazing events we have lined up for the rest of the semester. But that does conclude our event for tonight. If you have further questions, feel free to email them to me, or if Alicia is okay with connecting with you guys on LinkedIn, feel free to do that as well. But yeah, thank you guys for attending our event tonight. We're so glad we were able to do this, and we hope you gained something out of it as well.
Oh, and good luck on y'all's exams. I forgot. Ooh-wee.
Thank you.
That's one thing I don't miss is exams. Good luck.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.